So the Cadian Shock Elite have some shiny new rules to go with their shiny new models. Let's talk Kasrkin and Codex Astra Militarum, who are shaping up to be one of the better guard units going forward, I think. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're continuing in our look through the Astra Militarum Codex, and today we've reached the Kasrkin, Cadian Shock Elite with the hotshot las guns and far too many special weapons. They've had new models come out recently in that Kill Team kit. Hopefully they should be getting an individual release at some stage. I feel like with their rather snazzy new models they are going to be fairly popular for people to pick up, and it does look like they're perhaps one of the more interesting units in the Codex for being very strong in game, delivering brutal hotshot and special weapon death to nearby foes. In the video we'll talk over their rules and wargear choices, what sort of battlefield role they should potentially be going for, their extra doctrines and any buffs and synergy for them, a couple of unit ideas, and a bit of an overall take. Loads to talk about for the pride of Cadia, so let's get straight into it. So Kasrkin have their own datasheet in Codex Astra Militarum. It is distinct from Militarum Tempestus Scions. The two units get very similar war gear, but a few different special rules, and they will work in different ways, I think. Kasrkin are fielded in a 10-man unit only. It's 100 points for 10 models, including all the squad war gear, and it is perhaps interesting that they're not fieldable in squads less than 10. It really does mean that you have to commit to a unit, and it likely means that they might be good things for buffing and damage dealing. It means that they're just not really going to be fielded as throwaway units, which you might be able to get away with cheap units of 5 scions. The Kasrkin get core, regimental, and platoon keywords, and for close range infantry damage dealers, they're perhaps some of the best ones that you could possibly buff. You can stack good character buffs, doctrines, and stratagems all on one unit to make them hit devastatingly hard. Statline wise, they get a 6-inch move, hit on 4s in melee and 3s at range, strength and toughness 3, 1 wound, 2 attacks, leadership 8 on the sergeant, and a 4+ carapace armor save. The sergeant also gets 3 attacks. In general, a stat line that sets them up to be fairly fragile but dangerous damage dealers. The 4+ armor is good for guard, but still not awesome for 10 points to be honest. Small arms or things with AP-1 are going to go through them pretty quickly. Weapons wise, the squad is armed with hotshot las guns, 24-inch range now, and rapid fire 1, strength 3, AP-2, damage 1. Quite nice that they can rapid fire out to 12-inch range now, not 9, and a flurry of low strength attacks with perhaps surprisingly good AP. You might not get that many wounds with them, but the ones that you do get will have a decent chance of penetrating armor. Then there's a bunch of options they get. Besides the sergeant, everything is free. One can trade their las gun for a las pistol and melter mine, giving up a las shot for some mortal wounds in combat against vehicles if you use a stratagem, and better vicious traps. Then you get 4 different special weapons, all included for free. The gear is handed out as per the kit. You can take 2 of any of the selections, the standard plasma, melter, grenade launcher and flamer, but also the hotshot volley gun like the scions, 24 inches, and rapid fire 2, strength 4, AP 2 and damage 1. That's a pretty solid upgrade over the standard hotshots if you just want more of the same. Twice the shots and better strength is very good. They also get the interesting option of the hotshot sniper rifle, again a single free upgrade instead of 1 different las gun. This one goes for a single shot at 36 inches, strength 4, AP-2 and a big hit of 3, plus they get to ignore lookout sir and 1 mortal wound on 6s to wound. Quite a fun choice, though maybe a little bit all or nothing. I guess if you just happen to get very lucky with that, then you could get some surprise big damage on a character. Perhaps a bit more of a potent hidden threat than you might get out of other snipers perhaps. Then the sergeant for wargear can take a plasma pistol or a power sword, both 5 points each, so maybe just a little bit less tempting as gear that you actually need to pay for rather than you just get at base. Otherwise one gets a free voxcaster, nice for some broadcast boosts from afar. Finally, in terms of special rules, Kasrkin can't deep strike in this codex. They don't get any grav shoots included, so that's basically one of the main differences between them and the scions. To get their special weapons and hotshots into the fray, you're going to need chimeras or other ways of getting them there. But they do get 1 extra tailored buff, which kind of feels a little bit similar to veteran style doctrines. You get to pick 1 extra regimental doctrine from the big list for free and add it on to the rest of the ones that you have. It does look like it has to be different to every other one in your army though, so it looks like you can't just spam out several different copies of the exact same nice boost that you might want. Maybe some of the interesting ones look like ignores cover, the mechanized one, or plus 4-inch range. We'll go through some of the best options in a second. Overall, this stacks up Kasrkin as fairly dangerous elite infantry with some brutal shooting up close, loads of access to buffs, though maybe aren't super tough for the points cost. Small arms will go through them at a reasonable rate. So out of all those wargear options then, which ones might be the best to actually take? For the sergeant, if you're going for optimising them and keeping them efficient, I would probably just both leave the power sword and plasma pistol at home. The rest of the squad largely doesn't want to be in combat unless you're doing something weird with brutal strength or something. so unless you're trying to make some sort of meme of melee Kasrkin work, I would probably leave that off. And the plasma pistol also doesn't seem to be particularly strong value at plus 5 points, though I suppose if you're going for absolute maximal buffs and giving them stratagems and rerolls and things, then that might tip the balance and make those 5 points worth it. I probably want rerolls of 1 before you'd really consider it though, otherwise killing the squad leader might be a bit of a dumb idea. For special weapons, I would rate the Plasma Melter and the Hotshot Volley Gun as the options to choose between. The Grenade Launcher and Flamer I just really don't think add as much value at the moment, not when they all cost the exact same. Out of the top 3, I guess if you're going to try and make a focus squad that is actually quite good at taking out hard targets, I guess it will be Plasma and Melter. If you want them to be a bit more mixed role though, and double down on hotshot goodness, then the volley guns seem fine. They could perhaps be particularly interesting if you're using that mortal wound on 6s stratagem. They add on a very decent amount of hotshot fire coming on the enemy to fish for those 6s. The Melter Mine, I'd say probably leave it at home more than bring it. It's just a bit sad to downgrade a hotshot las gun down to a las pistol. I'd say maybe if it just did something innately in combat, I'd be a bit more for it, but when it only allows you a 1 CP stratagem for around 3 mortal wounds on targets, I'm just not sure that's really worth the CP spend, plus throwing the squad into combat in the first place when they're not generally that well suited for it. They might have 2 attacks, but Strength 3 isn't really going to do a whole ton against vehicles that the Melter Mine wants to hit. Still though, I guess you're not sacrificing loads by picking it up. I could happily take or leave. Finally, for the Hotshot Sniper, I think that despite being a heavy weapon and maybe not meshing ideally with the rest of the unit, I think it is still worth taking as a free upgrade. It'll be a tiny bit worse than the Hotshot las guns against light infantry, or if you're fishing for mortal wounds with overcharged las cells, but if you're just targeting things like Space Marines, even on the move, then the Hotshot Sniper does better. It should certainly beat everything out against things with multi-wounds or 3 wounds, and it is quite cool to have the chance of potentially laying down 3 wounds on a hidden character. That's at least a threat that your opponent would have to be aware of. If the squad is using any other buffs or stratagems, then it only gets nastier. Rounding up, I'd probably leave the Sergeant Barebones, Plasma Melter or Hotshots for the special weapons, probably leave off the Melter Mine, and take the Sniper. As for the Kasrkin's intended battlefield role, per infantry they're going to be less tough per point than regular infantry. I don't think that the 4+ save outweighs an extra 3 or 4 points when upgrading from the standard infantry squad, and with good damage between the hotshots and the special weapons, you generally want to be hitting the enemy before they hit you and alpha strike them, so they're a good units to buff with stratagems and characters. Being fragile but hard hitting means they really need a way to get there, which either probably means transports, the Barbicant's key relic, or maybe things like strategic reserves or just hiding behind terrain, but I feel like maybe the first 2 are a bit more tempting. The next option for the Kasrkins to choose are which extra doctrines to pick. Obviously this will partly depend on which doctrines you're taking for the army overall in the first place, as you might already have 1 or more of these just by the ones that you've chosen for your regiment, but if you haven't, then these ones are perhaps some of the most interesting I think. I think that mechanized infantry could easily be one of the best. You gain the keyword and you get to disembark after your transport has moved, so you could have a Chimera moving 12 inches, and then these guys get out within 3, so they get to move 15 inches essentially before firing out their guns at 12 inches. Quite a big threat range, and if you're feeling a bit spendy you could even re-embark them for 2 CP. It seems particularly nice for the bonus doctrine this one, as it's going to be a rule that might not affect most of your army, just the transport ones, so just focusing it on 1 squad seems fairly optimal. Veteran Guerrillas allows you to gain the keyword and ignore cover within 18 inches. The Kasrkin generally want to be shooting within a short range anyway, so this one works out great for them. A nice extra shooting buff to go with the rest. Generic strong shooting things like those extra 4-inch range and the elite sharpshooter single reroll will help out a bit. Maybe not super crucial, but certainly won't hurt. Brutal strength I think is actually particularly interesting on Kasrkin, maybe more so than just about any other unit in the army I reckon. Kind of weird as that's the fluffy Katachan one, but Kasrkin are famously cadian. Brutal strength gives you strength 4, plus the ability to move and fire with heavy weapons, both of which help them out a bit more than normal. Having 2 attacks at strength 4 actually makes them somewhat of a combat threat, still not loads but will bully light infantry quite well, and being able to move and fire with heavy weapons means that you could use first rank fire, second rank fire on all those hot shots and get 3 shots per hot shot las gun. I'm not sure if it's quite enough to outweigh just taking loads of special weapons though, as that means that you wouldn't actually have that many hot shots in the squad anyway. Special weapons plus take aim is already quite strong, so it could be a little bit borderline use maybe. Finally, Born Soldiers, I think that that's not one that you can take as the extra doctrine, but it would be quite handy if your army happened to have it. Auto wounding on 6s is very nice for the hotshots, or 5s with their stratagem, and it's particularly handy for the unique overcharged las cell stratagem, as unmodified hit rolls of a 6 count as a wound roll of a 6. Moving on for other ways to buff the squad and get more out of them. And first and foremost, I think it's definitely worth mentioning their synergy with the relic, the Barbican's Key. The guard can buy this in on the squad leader for 1 CP before the game begins, and it allows you a single teleport move once per game, and also allows you to reroll charges after making that move, which might not be the most terrible thing against the right target. As with a lot of teleport style shenanigans in 40k, this means that they're really well placed for an excellent alpha strike. You could use this to start them on the board turn 1, hide them somewhere safe, and then jump them across the board after layering them up with command phase buffs and hit something really hard. I feel like a unit of 10 of these with that relic could be really quite a tempting pick in just about any guard army. Next up, the other good way of getting them there are transports. They perhaps might be the single best unit to use with the mechanised infantry trait. They might not be obsec, but they do deal massive damage after they've got out, and being fairly expensive and slightly fragile infantry, you could definitely afford to shell out for a transport to get them there safely. Plus on top of that, there's that one command point armoured fist stratagem to allow you to reroll wound rolls after you've got out of a transport, and that's very nice on those high volume of fired hotshot attacks. Their three main options, outside of massive super heavies and things, are Chimeras, Tauroxes, and Valkyries. Out of those, I do feel that the Chimera and Taurox are both pretty well balanced at the moment. The Taurox is decently cheaper, but also a bit easier to kill, and it doesn't allow you to transport officers alongside them. Chimeras have a few advantages, including the lasgun arrays, and allowing the officer to disembark alongside them and then order them, which could be pretty key for take aim or maybe first rank, second rank. I feel like Valkyries are okay, but maybe just a little bit less overwhelming, seeing as you could easily take mechanized infantry and use one of the former. Still seems usable though, just pays a bit of a premium over what you might want for how much the squad costs. I do think that transports will be a very viable and popular way to fill them as well. Next up, we've got character buffs, and foremost the orders. They do have a Voxcaster for a little bit more flexibility, and as mentioned, both Take Aim and First Rank Fire, Second Rank Fire are both pretty great on these. Probably Take Aim is my favourite of the two, +1 to hit and an extra AP -1, and that means that you've got a squad hitting on 2s with crazy AP -3 hotshot attacks, or even more on the special weapons. If you are spamming hotshots, then First Rank Fire, Second Rank Fire isn't bad, but unless you're actually ditching special weapons for hotshots, which I'm not sure is advisable, then I feel like Take Aim's usually still going to win out. I feel like the other regimental or commissar ones could be okay for a squad starting on the board, not too bad to have around as some pop-up objectives secured or something like that, but I feel like you'd be using Take Aim like 90% of the time. Otherwise, I'd say plenty of the other characters have value as well. You can get rerolls from Acadian Castellan or Command Squad standard. The Castellans ones look like they'd be quite nice for rerolling hit rolls on Plasma as well. You could give them the crazy full rerolls to hit and wound from Lord Solar. Could be very nice with that Barbican's Key relic. Give them Lord Solar's rerolls and then be rerolling all your hits and wounds against your target. That's going to cause some massive damage. Ursula Creed could be pretty good fun for Strength 4 lasguns plus Take Aim. A Psyker, I guess, could try and make the squad a bit more survivable with the Invul save or the Night Shroud power. Doesn't seem like the worst use of them, but I feel like maybe putting Night Shroud on a big tank might be better. And other advantages of the command squad could be that Finial standard that turns off enemy feel no pains and things, or the Relic of Lost Cadia for a single game boost with +1 to hit. Out of these, I think my picks would be Ursula Creed, Lord Solar, and maybe the Cadian Castellan perhaps. All of those seem pretty efficient in their own way, and could also be potentially working on other things as well while helping out the Kasrkin. Stratagems next, and I must admit, as I was going through the guard stratagem section, it did just seem like there were an awful lot that looked like they'd be great on Kasrkin. I feel like they may be overloaded with decent damage dealer options here, to the extent where they get a little bit redundant, because you probably don't want to be spending something like 3 CP per turn. First up, and perhaps one of the most obvious, is Overcharged Las Cells. 1 CP for 6s to wound with hotshot attacks getting mortal wounds. It caps out at 6, though you probably struggle to hit it most of the time. This one seems like a very tempting pick if you've taken a couple of hotshot volley guns alongside those las guns. Really nice with all manner of things, particularly things like Lord Solar's rerolls or Born Soldiers or both. Both of those are pathways to getting a lot more 6s to wound. It also combos very nicely with the second one on this list, Armoured Fist, a core unit disembarking from a transport's rerolls or wound rolls against the closest eligible target. It's very uncommon to see full rerolls to wounds just handed out for a 1 CP stratagem. It's really quite a big asset to them, and not bad at all given the low strength of their lasguns. Another good incentive to run them in transports, I guess. Vengeance for Cadia is 1 CP. That one gives you a +1 to wound against Chaos when you're shooting or fighting. Again, a very handy damage dealer. No restriction on having to get out of transports on that one. Only going to be relevant against some armies though, I guess. For 1 CP, there's Experienced Eye. This is Kasrkin gets to improve their AP by -1. That'd be really quite a nice boost on top of some of the rest here, particularly if you're shooting against something like Terminators or things with ridiculous stacking saves, where every pip of AP is vital. There's that Meltermine one for 1 CP for fighting a vehicle or monster. He gets 2 to 5 for D3 plus 1 mortal wounds and a 6 for 2 D3. Kind of situational and not one that I plan on using, but if it happened to crop up, then by all means go for it. Finally, for damage dealers, there's the Born Soldiers one for auto wounding on a 5+ to hit, not 6. Again, a very solid damage boost to low strength high AP weapons and combined solidly with overcharged las cells. Lastly, there is one durability one for 1 CP Cadia Stance. A Cadian infantry unit can't be wounded on a 1 to 3. It's perhaps a maximal use on the Kasrkin, to be honest, with their better saves. If you manage to get the squad in cover and activate this, it could be surprisingly hard to remove with basic weapons. Overall, an absolute ton of very decent damage dealers here. I feel like a lot of them just really depend on exactly what you're shooting or how many las guns you have in the squad versus specials. Out of all of these, I feel like overcharged las cells and armored fist both seem like the biggest winners. If you could put yourself in a situation where you're planning on using both of those jumping out of a chimera, then I feel like you're almost guaranteed to do some pretty hefty damage with the squad. Next up, I thought we'd just take a look at a couple of different unit ideas. First up, here's one with the Barbican's Key, planning on being jumped across the board turn 1, but only after being given Take Aim and Lord Solar Leontis' rerolls. His plan turn 1 is to buff these guys while also handing out 2 other orders to other things and his reroll bubble to things in the gun line, and then he can turn those big rerolls on something else later on. In this squad, we're taking them in a regiment using the Born Soldiers doctrine, so 6s to hit will get 6s to wound. The squad's taken 2 melter guns, 2 plasma guns, a hotshot sniper, the Barbican's Key, and we've also budgeted 1 CP spare, either for overcharged las cells or potentially something like Vengeance for Cadia. The bonus doctrine taken for this squad is Ignores Cover, so light cover won't be decreasing this damage output. Just for some rough maths, using the overcharged las cells stratagem, it adds up to around about 17 dead guardsmen from the Alpha Strike, 6 or 7 dead marines from the mortal wounds and all the specials and things, around about 19 wounds to a toughness 7 vehicle, which is pretty meaty, and around about 11 wounds to a big tough target of toughness 8, a 5+ invul and -1 damage. A lot of the wounds come from damage 1 weapons or mortal wounds, which don't really care for such defences. Definitely a fair bit of investment, 2 CP plus rerolls from an expensive character, but having 100 points worth of models kill this much of the enemy is almost always going to be a big win, particularly as you'll hopefully have at least a decent amount of choice as to what you get to hit with this. Otherwise, for another idea, here's an Armoured Fist Las Squad. This one's a Kasrkin unit using your own choice of doctrines, and this squad's taking 2 hotshot volley guns, 2 plasma guns, a hotshot sniper, and intention to use the 1 CP Armoured Fist stratagem for the reroll to wounds when they get out. If you didn't already have it in your army, then these guys will be using the Mechanized Infantry as their bonus doctrine, so 12-inch move on the Chimera, and then jump out and get shooting. If you're feeling like a bit more investment, you could potentially add a Castellan or Creed for orders and rerolls when they get out. Probably a Castellan's a bit more realistic. You probably want Creed in the backfield, issuing lots of orders. Even with just Armoured Fist, they should be stacking some wounds on most things, and as mentioned, you could certainly combine that with the overcharged las cells as well, given so many hotshots here. Reroll wounds plus 6s doing mortals is a great combo. So overall, I do feel that Kasrkin are looking pretty interesting and scary in the new book. As for using them in game, if I was taking the Barbican's Key, I'd probably want to hide them turn 1, get them some command phase buffs and orders, then teleport them off with the stratagem and go and hurt things. Ideally, I guess you'd want to drop onto an objective or into cover if you could, while you're still hitting the enemy that you can. And with the reroll charges, it might well actually be worth thinking about what you could charge. If your opponent's got some very fragile toughness 3 infantry that they don't really want in combat, that could be a pretty good idea, particularly if you think your opponent might just be able to remove them without too much difficulty when they counterattack. For the transport squad, I guess you want to try and keep the Chimera hidden early on, and then just give them a big shunt into effective range. Again, also hopefully getting out on an objective or in cover if it's convenient while they're doing what they're doing. I feel like unless you can find some clever way to hide them though, against a lot of armies they are probably going to be one-hit wonders, probably maul the target that they're attacking and then get hit back in return, at least that way hopefully drawing fire from other things in your army, hopefully the battle tanks and things that are just continuing to pound the army all game long. I guess maybe not a terrible unit to use as bait, your opponent might well charge them, and then hopefully you have other things to counterattack after that. In comparison with other choices within the Codex, I do feel that they're probably the best unit for deploying out of transports. High cost fragile infantry with good damage means that you can really justify the extra points to protect them, and that'd go a long way. Their main competitors do seem to be the Scions, who get to deep strike from turn 2 using their own rules, and you don't have to pay for things like the Barbican's Key. I do feel like both of the two have their own interesting niches now. The Scions get their exploding sixes to hit, but no other fun doctrines. I did a bit of a discussion comparison video on them previously, but that was before we knew whether or not Scions got doctrines or not, so maybe I'll have to redo that video at some point in the future. It could also be kind of interesting to go really all in on the hotshot lasgun damage dealer stratagem, maybe have Kasrkin use the Barbican's Key to hit the enemy turn 1, maybe alongside some Scions jumping out of a Valkyrie, and then turn 2 hit them with a mechanised armoured fist squad and a whole bunch of deep striking Scions as well. That does sound like it could be quite good fun in keeping up the hotshot pressure. I guess the other alternative is just to use cheap cadian shock troops to go forward and take objectives and do the dying, and not try and rely on them as main damage dealers besides a bit of chip damage, and then just invest a whole load of points in tanks and artillery at the back. Overall though, I do feel like the Kasrkin are strong enough to justify the investment in them. I'm sure we'll be seeing people use them in competitive lists, particularly the ones out of Chimeras and jumping with the Barbican's Key. Let me know your thoughts though. How well do you think that the Kasrkin are shaping up at the moment? And would you be tempted to use them in competitive guard lists going forward? If you'd like to see more unit reviews like this, feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics. I will certainly try and keep plenty of guard tactics content coming. If you'd like to see another video, then I'll link my recent review of the field ordnance batteries down in the video description below. Feel free to check that out next if you want to see more guard stuff. Finally, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, which is how I can afford to keep on making quite so many videos like this just about every day. If you have been enjoying quite a lot, then any support is enormously appreciated. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next for the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.